We have already seen that the death of William and the execution of Justin have impacted upon Victor's mind very badly, because he finds no relief even after the end of Justin's trial, and he's continuously, haunted by thoughts of how he is responsible for the death of so many innocent lives, and this deprives him of sleep as well as rest. And gradually, Victor again isolates himself from his family, because, and we also he not only isolates from his family, and all these unfortunate incidents result in his mental anguish and anxiety, because he is full of remorse and guilt, because Victor knows it very well that it is his own creation who is responsible for the death of innocent lives like William and Justin's. He is also tempted by suicide, but he's afraid to leave his near and dear ones, because he knows that the monster is still there and anything might happen to his family members or to his beloved ones. And therefore he tries to, forget his sorrows by taking refuge in the magnificence of nature, and therefore sets off for the valley of Chamonix, because now he seems to sink, into a deep depression, and he's unable to escape from it. As far as Elizabeth is concerned, now after the death of Justin, even Elizabeth matures, and she is able to, understand that injustice is also a part of her world. And a very important comment given by Elizabeth, made by Elizabeth in this chapter on the death of Justin, is where she says that to her, men appear to be like monsters who are, thirsty for each other's blood, and this gives Shelley a more opportunity for social criticism, because if we consider the comment made by Elizabeth, it means she puts men and monsters on equal footing. She doesn't find any difference between these two beings. And here Shelley again blurs the boundaries between the monstrous and the human. And we, as readers, we begin to, think as to how should we define quote unquote a monster, and how should we define quote unquote man. And therefore, in this chapter, the way Victor speaks, even his language, repeatedly provides us with the idea of the double, because he refers to himself as an embodiment of evil when he says, I wandered like an evil spirit, for I had committed deeds of mischief beyond description horrible. So, according to Victor, he himself appears to be an embodiment of evil spirit, and he says that he has committed actions which are so horrible that they are indescribable. They cannot be, that his actions cannot be described in words. And he also speaks of the devil that resides in his heart, because somewhere he feels that he is the one who has given birth to this monster. Okay, so it means that there must have been something evil dwelling in his heart which made him give birth to this monster. So he suffers from all these thoughts, make him descend into depression. And it is his father also, finds that his son is suffering too much, though he does not know what Victor has created and endured for 6 years. So and then we find in this chapter that Victor tries to find shelter in the magnificence of nature. And in this chapter, Shelley, uh, Victor, he undertakes a tour of the nearby Chamonix Valley, which is in France, because he feels that he needs rest, and a vacation might help him to recover. So he undertakes this tour. As far as nature is concerned, um, in this chapter we find Shelley depicting the dual nature, the dual role of nature, because she seems to focus not only on the she seems to focus on the restorative and healing power of nature, because we find the protagonist Victor trying to find peace amidst nature. And the way the cold high mountains and the immense glaciers are described in this chapter, also emphasize once again Victor's alienation, his isolation from human affections. So on one hand, Shelley, as I said, she focuses on the restorative power of nature, and on the other hand, uh, while there is thunder and lightning portrayed or depicted in this chapter, it signals the reappearance of the monster to the readers. So this in this chapter, we find Shelley describing nature in two ways. She not only focuses on the healing power, on the refreshing power of nature, but she also uses the dark side of nature, like the thundering and lightning, to signal the reappearance of the monster. And she does this, to make readers understand, to make readers understand that this is not the end. Though Victor tries to find peace, the Victor tries to seek peace in nature, but we as readers know that the monster is still there, and Victor may not be successful in having peace in his life. And the way, this tour of the Chamonix Valley, which is undertaken by Victor, described by Shelley, it is also very much characteristic of romantic thought, because according to the romantics used to, find peace. They believed that nature has the power to restore peace to one's soul, and nature can refresh one's soul. So that is why it is very, very characteristic of romantic thought, the way nature is described and depicted as a motherly figure able to restore peace to one's soul. Next, in chapter 10, we find that Victor is already in the mountains, and this is the significance of the storm is also understood by the readers, because the storm, thundering, lightning, everything signals the reappearance of the monster, because this image or this picture of weather is used as a signal throughout the novel by Shelley. Because remember how she described the atmosphere when the monster was being created by Victor and when he came to life. And it is in this chapter that, from the sublime scenes around him, the Victor gains some comfort, and he decides that he would ascend he would climb up the summit of Mont Anvert. And he's very much filled with joy when he looked at Mont Blanche. But it is immediately at that moment when Victor encounters the monster. And Victor's encounter with the monster, he finds that someone is approaching him with superhuman speed, and then he realizes that it is the monster who is approaching him, bounding over the icy crevices. And again, like before, Victor is filled with disgust, Victor is filled with rage and horror, and he rejects him. And here, for the first time, when there is an encounter between Victor and a monster, we find that Victor, while addressing the monster, often describes him as devil, fiend, vile insect. While when we look at the monster and the way he speaks, he simply surprises the readers by speaking with such eloquence. He seems to have such a great power of speech, such a great gift of speech, and he speaks with much dignity. Rather, we find that it is Victor who reacts with savage passion. And here, the monster, compares himself with Adam and the fallen angel, and an allusion is given to there is an allusion to the biblical creation story of Adam, because the monster says that instead of being Adam, who is nurtured by his creator, his situation is just like Satan, the fallen angel who was abandoned by God. And so he says that instead of being like Adam in paradise, his condition, his situation is more like a fallen angel who has been thrown out, who has been driven from heaven, though having no fault of his own. So here Shelley alludes to the biblical creation story of Adam, and he says that it is his misery that has turned him into a devil. This is what he tells Victor in order to convince him, in order to make him understand the very situation he is in. And then he tells him that there is a line which you find in this chapter where the monster says that, make me happy and I shall again be virtuous. So what the monster is trying to convey to his creator, Victor, is that since he has been rejected, since he has been abandoned, neglected by his creator, okay, it made his life miserable, and it is this misery, this suffering, that has turned him into a devil, which led him to kill innocent people. And so he requests his creator that if he is ready to make him happy, then he will again, he will regain his virtuous nature again. And it is here, after having said everything to Victor, that Victor kind of gets convinced that he should listen to the monster. And then they proceed to a hut where the monster begins to tell his story. So here the situation, what this chapter is significant because it immediately makes readers sympathize with the situation of the monster, and at the same time we are able to understand Victor's crime in refusing to nurture or to accept, in refusing to nurture his creation or accept his creation. And it is through the speech, through the eloquence of the monster, that Victor's irresponsibility as a creator is highlighted in this chapter. And Shelley also makes references to Milton's Paradise Lost, as I said, the creation story of Adam, to complicate the analogies or the similarities between Victor as God and the monster as Adam. So Shelley simply, she simply complicates it, because Victor doesn't appear to be a responsible creator like God, and even though his creation is monster who is supposed to have the position of Adam, or who is supposed to enjoy the affection of his creator, his situation is appears to be more like a fallen angel. Satan, though Satan had his own fault, he rebelled against God, but the monster, without having any fault of his own, is simply treated like a fallen angel and rejected and abandoned by his own creator, unlike God. And it is here that Shelley simply complicates the analogies between Victor and the monster. Now we know, we saw in the previous chapter that there is an encounter between Victor and the monster, and now Victor is all set to listen to the story of the monster, because the monster has been able to convince him through the power of his speech to listen to his story. He tried to reason out with Victor, explaining everything regarding his miserable state. And therefore we found that now Victor thought that it would be that he should listen to the monster. And it is from chapter 11 that the innermost embedded narrative begins. Now when we began reading the novel, we found the frame narrative, which was the narrative told by Robert Walton. And after that, within Robert Walton's frame narrative, we came across Victor's narrative. And now within Victor's narrative, we find the innermost embedded narrative, or the story, which will be narrated by the monster. So in chapter 11, the monster begins to describe his early life after he was created by his creator, Victor Frankenstein. And at the same time, the De Lacy family is introduced. So here you find, from this chapter onwards, we find that the monster, begins the first 6 chapters. He relates his story, everything. And when he first came to consciousness, he begins explaining with vague memories, and how it led to the discovery of his sensations. And then he tells that he took refuge in a forest, and how he discovered the use of fire. But then his situation was miserable, because he was in great need of food and shelter. So here in this chapter, the De Lacy family is introduced in this innermost embedded narrative. And here we come across the concept of noble savage. Now, let's discuss the concept of noble savage. Now, if we look at the character or the nature of the monster, we find that he is like he's like a natural man or noble savage. But essentially, he's very kind, he's very benevolent. And gradually we find that after the monster comes into contact with human society, with the civilized world, okay, how it casts a deep impact, or how it casts a deep influence on his nature, leading to his transformation. So in this chapter, a full account, a detailed account of the monster's adventure is provided to the readers by Shelley, because here we find that this innocent monster gets his psyche formed by his contact with the world, with the society, and he is drawn to civilization. But it is this outside world, the civilized world, which rejects him. And why does the society reject him? Because the monster's appearance does not conform to the expected standards of society. And he appears to be as an alien, he appears to be as something strange, and therefore it is on the basis of his strange appearance that he is immediately rejected by the civilized world. And he keeps on, and as the De Lacy family is introduced in this chapter, we find that the monster keeps on watching from afar the De Lacy family, and gradually he understands, he learns more about emotions, and he learns more about emotion, about love. So the monster gradually gets educated after he comes into contact with the outside, with the world around him. And it is not that he's only he only learns about emotions like love, feelings, kindness. No, his it is his contact with the civilized world which would also lead to the transformation, to the change of his mind, to the change of his psyche. And here it is, and so the humans he encounters in this chapter, like the De Lacy family, he finds that the De Lacy families and the other people he encounters, they react with fear. Like in there is one instance you find in this chapter where a little girl was getting drowned in the river, and he saved that little girl. But instead, what happened? The child's father, what he did, instead of being grateful to the monster, he simply shot him. And this is how we find that the humans he encounters react with fear, and therefore he is driven out of a village. And it is the De Lacy family. Adjoining to their cottage, he finds a low hut, and there he makes his home, and he begins to watch the De Lacy family from afar. And why this De Lacy family is represented as an idyllic example of family life, because they exhibit or they display they display a devotion, a love and care that all families should always try to achieve. And what the monster does, as I said, he keeps on observing the De Lacy family for a long time, but he's careful enough not to make them aware of his presence. And gradually what happens, he becomes very fond of his newly adopted family, because for the first time in this chapter we find that he feels love. As I mentioned, that he learns about emotions, he learns about love. And here, though Shelley makes the reader want to see the monster as a maligned creature, but is worthy of understanding, because when we say that the monster is represented as a maligned creature, he is hated, he is having this strange alien appearance, he is ugly, but whatever he does or whatever he says, it is worthy of understanding. As readers, we should understand what he tries to convey or what he tries to say. So with this, in chapter 11, we find that the education of the monster begins, and his first education being his lesson, or let's say his first education begins with his learning about emotion, love, devotion, and the concept of family, that what a family is all about, or how do family members live with each other, how they are, how much affection they have for each other. All these are gradually realized, felt, and understood by the monster. So in the next chapter, we find that the monster, education continues, and his observation of the De Lacy family also continues along with his education, because now the monster, begins to learn from watching the De Lacy family. But he realizes one thing, that this family suffers from poverty, and as I already mentioned, that the monster is very benevolent, though that's why the concept of noble savage means he's noble hearted, he's just like a noble man, although he may appear like a savage on the outside, but inside he is out and out very benevolent, very kind. So having seen this impoverished condition of the De Lacy family, he begins to help them, as he helps them by cutting wood during the night. Not only this, he listens to them very carefully, and gradually, as I said, his education continues. So what kind of education he receives now? He begins to learn the fundamentals, the basics of language, by from listening to their conversation. He keeps on overhearing their conversation, and gradually he comes to learn the basics or the fundamentals of language. And he also finds the De Lacy family members to be very, very beautiful. And here in this chapter, it is very important to note that when the monster, views himself for the first time. He looks at his own face for the first time. He sees his reflection in a pool. He is filled with shame and he's horrified, having seen his deformities, because immediately he begins to compare himself to the De Lacy families who appear to be so De Lacy family members who appear to be so beautiful. However, when he finds that the De Lacy family members are very affectionate, they are very kind and gentle, somewhere the monster feels that they might receive him with kindness if he's able somehow, if he's able to win their good opinion. And here again the power of language is emphasized by Shelley, because in chapter 9 we already found that how the monster used his how the monster was able to, in the previous chapters we found how the monster was able to convince his creator Victor to listen to his story. And how did he do that? He did that with the power of his speech. And the same thing again occurs to him, that with the help of his speech, with the power of his language, if he is able to win the good opinion of this family, then they might receive him, they might treat him or accept him with kindness. And so now what he does, he becomes very, very determined to acquire, to understand, to learn language. And this hope that his language would enable him to win over the kindness, the affection of the De Lacy family provides him happiness. So, and we also find, the monster, he also begins to believe in the power of language, because he knows that he is ugly. He's aware of his deformities, so he knows it very well that his appearance will not let anyone accept him. So he feels that it is only with the power of his speech, it is only with the power of his language that he will be able to overcome the disability of his physical appearance. In this chapter, we also find that the concept of the accepted standard of beauty is suggested, and this is something which is realized by the monster as well. Now, although he is now aware of his own fearful appearance, but his fearful appearance does not stop him, from being a good creature, from being a kind-hearted creature, even though he is in a very miserable condition. And since and he's also unable to understand, because we know that he was quite moved by the impoverished state of the De Lacy family, so he began to offer help. He began to help the family by cutting wood during the night. So he tried his best to help the De Lacy family. And when he used to overhear their conversation, and the De Lacy family used to refer to him as a good spirit and a wonderful person, the monster is simply unable to understand the meaning of these words. He is unable to understand the compliments which are directed towards him by the De Lacy family. In fact, we find that one day he even thinks that one day he would present himself to the family. And every time in this chapter you find the monster referring to the De Lacy family as quote unquote his family, his adopted family. And why does he do so? Because he feels he appears to be much affectionate towards the family, and not only that, it also suggests his need for a family. It also suggests the monster's need for affection and the monster's need for having a family of his own. So he feels that considering his good deeds, this De Lacy family would one day when he would present himself before them, they would simply accept him, because they are kind-hearted, they are affectionate. And he also has this hope that with the power of his language he will be able to overcome his deformities. He will be able to overcome his deformed physical appearance, and this, is kind of it is a kind of hope for the monster. And it is this hope, that makes him very, very determined to acquire knowledge, to be able to attain that eloquence in his language, that eloquence in his speech. Next, when we come to chapter 13, we find that this chapter also, serves as a critic of society and human injustice. And how does this chapter appear to be serve as a critic of society? That we'll see. We find that now the De Lacy family, from now in this chapter, the De Lacy family members are introduced, and a beautiful Arabian woman arrives, with whom Felix de Lacy appears to be in love with. So Felix appears to be in love with a beautiful Arabian woman whose name is Sefi. And the monster finds that Sefi is taught English by the family, and the monster, and when she is taught English by Felix, by the family, the monster also takes this opportunity and tries to understand those lessons as well. So he finds that the book that is used by Felix in order to tutor, or in order to help, in order to make Sefi learn, is Volney's Ruins of Empires. And this book, which is being used by Felix in order to tutor Sefi, provides the monster with the basic knowledge of the history, politics, and religion of various nations. So in this chapter also, we find that the education of the monster continues. But here, for the first time, he begins to wonder at the dual nature of man. How? Because he finds that on one hand, human beings, man appears to be so powerful, so virtuous, and so magnificent that they are able to impart lessons to others. And on the other hand, they are so mean, they are so base, they are so polluted at heart. So this question arises in the mind of the monster, and it makes him wonder, it makes him doubt the dual nature of man. And it is in this chapter that the most important thing that is learned by the monster is the cruelty of man towards anything which is strange, which is alien, which is different. And when he realizes this, that anything which does not conform to the expected standard, social standard to the expected social standard of beauty would be immediately discarded and rejected by men, it makes him realize that with his alien appearance, okay, he is never going to have a family, he's never going to have friends, position, because he's cursed with his deformed, hateful appearance. And therefore, the monster realizes that his deformed appearance will never let him have a family of his own. Nobody would ever be friends with him, and he would not be able to have a position of his own in this society as well. And it is this realization that makes the condition of the monster more and more miserable. And it is here that the monster education provides Shelley, or you can say that gives Shelley that opportunity to criticize society and human injustice. Because the way human beings who were supposed to be affectionate, human beings who were supposed to be kind-hearted, they behave in such monstrous manner, while the monster, who is supposed to be monstrous, or who is supposed to be, cruel, is rather depicted as a benevolent creature. So here again, Shelley blurs the boundaries between the monstrous and the human. Why? Because we, again, as readers, we are in a kind of, dilemma, and we cannot decide that how should we define human beings on one hand, and on the other hand, how should we define the monster, because the monster appears to be benevolent, while the human beings appear to be cruel, and they are the ones who show utmost cruelty towards this benevolent creature only because of his alien, deformed appearance. We also find that in chapter 13, Shelley focuses upon two major concepts. One is the use of knowledge for good purposes, that when you gain knowledge and you use it for doing something good. And the second is to question the essence of man's good and evil tendencies, to know the world around you. So these are the two main concepts that are very, very integral to the novel, and very, very central to the novel, because it makes the readers as well as the monster question the essence of man's good and evil tendencies, that why do men have good tendencies and why do men have evil tendencies. So, and we cannot understand, and it is here that Mary Shelley simply blurs the boundary between the monstrous and the human. And the monster, Shelley also wonders that how, after acquiring information, after acquiring knowledge about the world, how man can be changed forever. Because I told you that the education of the monster will finally lead to his transformation. Because since he himself is very kind-hearted, is a benevolent creature, he thinks that everyone would accept his benevolence, and in spite of his ugly appearance, in spite of his deformed appearance, everyone would accept him because of his kind-heartedness, because of his benevolence. But that does not actually happen. So, man is simply, represented as a paradox of contrasts. That on one hand, and this, as I said, that it makes the, the monster question that how question the duality, the dual nature of man. That on one hand they appear to be so virtuous, and on the other hand they appear to be so cruel, so base. So, as I said, Shelley simply tries to depict man as a paradox of contrasts. And, Shelley also makes the monster question his own creation, because now the monster is well aware that he is different, he is alien, okay, and the society is never going to accept him. And it is this very thought that makes his situation more miserable, and it terrifies him at the same time, because he knows that because of his deformed appearance, he's never going to have his family, he's never going to have friends or position of his own in this society. And therefore, several questions emerge in his mind with regard to his own creation. But he does not have these answers, only he feels that his questions can be answered only by his creator, because he was completely ignorant. He didn't have any idea about his creator. And he also knew that he had no money, no property, no friends. So now the monster, begins to wonder. And several questions emerge in his mind regarding his creation, as to who his creator is, whether who he has a family, or did he ever have his mother or father. So all these questions make the monster more and more inquisitive about his very existence, and he feels that it is only through his creator that some of his questions can be answered. So, regarding the duality of the nature of man, Shelley simply questions the existence of good and evil present in all men. We cannot say that men only consist of goodness, or there is only evil in men. It's not like that. Men are depicted as I said, as a paradox of contrast, where there is good as well as evil. And so this is how Shelley makes this chapter a critic of society and human injustice, because we find that you'll find that nobody will accept the monster just on the basis of his alien experience. So in society, now how does it act as a critique of society? Because our society is structured, the mindset of society is such that physical appearance appears to be more important than the inner goodness of a creature. And this is what is emphasized or highlighted by Shelley in this very chapter, that nobody is going to take into account, nobody would take into account the goodness, the kind-heartedness of the monster. Instead, everyone would reject him just because he has a deformed appearance. And here, Shelley makes this chapter a criticism, a very bitter criticism of society, which also throws light on human injustice.